one way to get it all going. But there is, if it was my footage, but there's other footage that I'll talk about, and you guys can just look it up on YouTube later if you want to. So, coming here to Kentucky, the fallback thing that I could do, I thought about doing was a Q&A. But I thought since I'm in Kentucky, and we should cut that, otherwise we're gonna get feedback. Check one, check two, check one, okay. We don't want that to happen. But since coming into Kentucky, I thought this audience would probably really like to hear the Kentucky story, which is pretty remarkable. And in the Kentucky story involves the Kentucky footage. And let me hook this up right so you can. Yeah, and I'll talk loud too. So, this would have been about 2005. The BFRO, as you know, I got an organization, or most of you know, started an organization in the mid-90s called the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And we started receiving reports from it was the first big Bigfoot website that was receiving reports and putting them into a geographical database. And we got reports from all over the place, and we still do. And we post them so people can see them. And so it didn't take, 95 is when the internet really started happening in earnest. I mean, people were getting, around in 95, 96, it was like college students that, because you had to have a computer that could get online, first of all, you had to know somebody who would know how to do it and who would explain it to you. And then you had to go to a computer shop and tell them what components you need, and they had to assemble one for you. There was no laptops back then, and you couldn't just go out and buy a pre-assembled thing. You had, especially one that was made to go online, you had to buy the modem, you had to get the CD drive, and you had to figure out how much you wanted to pay for all these things, how much RAM drive you wanted. So it was a very slow process back then. But it was interesting because people were just starting to get online. Why do I have feedback here? So as more people were getting online, more and more information was coming to the BFRO from different parts of the country. And that went on for a long time. So that in 2005, a number of years later, I had already done one TV series on the Bigfoot subject by that point. It was called Mysterious Encounters. How can we deal with this? Yeah. Let's adjust this. I turned that off because the feedback, how do we do that? Maybe, I guess if we can turn down it because I'm talking so loud. There we go. Can you all still hear me in the back? Okay. I'm talking a little louder than Tom Shea, I think. I don't have an HDMI. Do you have an adapter that goes from HDMI to USB? I knew this was going to happen, and I told them, and they said, yeah, we got it all. All except the connection to my laptop. Yeah. I can do it without because can you bring your laptop in and then we can connect online? Because I want to show them stuff that's on YouTube and Google Maps and stuff. Okay, great, that'll work, yeah. Okay, so we're going to get to have some visuals. Okay, so 2005, we get, and we're getting information reports all the time. We get an email or a report, one of the two, where a guy who lives up in the area of Crittenden, which is between here and Cincinnati. How many people have heard of Crittenden? Because if you came down from the south, you would have, I think, driven right through it. Okay, so Crittenden, and then an area to the east of there, I can't remember how many miles, so when we look it up, I'll figure out exactly where it is. So we're talking east of Crittenden, off in the woods, and he says that he knows some people out there that have Bigfoots coming onto their property, or have seen one coming onto their property, and they have some video footage. And so we're like, okay, and we're always trying to profile these sorts of communications coming in, because of course we don't want to waste our time going on goose chases on bogus stories. But there was a few things about this that made us think, okay, this might be something. And one of those profiling things, noticing patterns from the past, is when somebody gets some very interesting footage or photos, video, etc., very often it's not the person who shot the video is the one who gets in touch with us, but it's somebody that person shows it to. He shows it to a few people, and then one of those people who's very impressed, they contact us and tell us about that. And that was that way with the Manitoba footage and a few other ones that, I mean, are not spectacular, but we think they're legit. So we hear about that somebody east of Crittenden has some amazing footage. And that's actually one good filter from us, because when some people contact us saying, I've got a great photo or video, etc., you know, of course what we always want to do is say, okay, well, before you run us around and go to the trouble to show us or to show somebody in our group, why don't you show it to somebody else and see if they think it's impressive? Not just the person who filmed it, but if you can show it to somebody else and they say, wow, that's a Bigfoot, then yeah, then we want to see the footage. But if you show it to somebody else and they go, I don't see anything, then it's probably not going to be interesting to us either. And it's, you know, because they might be seeing shapes in the bushes that make a face, you know, shape, which is a very common thing we get. Say, I got a great photo of a Bigfoot, and it's just shadows making kind of a vague face shape, and it's much of a Rorschach test, if I pronounce that correctly. So, 2005, summer 2005, we get a message. There's somebody saying there's some pretty impressive footage east of Crittenden. We talked to the guy and who told us about it. He eventually puts us in touch with the person who got the video. The person who got the video doesn't want to send it to us. He doesn't know exactly what to do in this situation, but he's willing to let somebody from our group come to his house to show him the footage. So the BFRO is a very large group. It has hundreds of people in it, investigators all over the country. So, and we were sharing this with this information with kind of the most active investigators in the group, saying this is going on and who wants to go out and see this footage. And again, it's an unusual situation because this isn't just footage of somebody got while they were in a state park or visiting somewhere, but no, this is footage of somebody who got something on their property of something they're saying is coming all the time. This is very often coming at night. So that makes it very important for us to see. So, two people from the group volunteered to go to the guy's place, a man or woman, and check it out. They went there, they saw the place, they saw the footage, and I remember it was Stan Courtney called me on the phone and he says, this is amazing footage. It's daylight footage, and it's a young one, and he's never seen anything like it. And you guys have still never seen anything like that. I mean, I'll be able to show you one little piece of it. But he's saying it's unusual the way this thing moves. It seems like it's moving almost like very, you know, something we didn't understand at the time. I mean, we were just learning about when you see these things move, and we understand it as it's like their body's conserving energy. They have a very kind of fluid, kind of slow motion move to them. And we think, again, it's because we have a problem of having too many calories and they don't have enough. So they're trying to conserve the energy and the food that they have, and we think that's why, you know, humans would seem like frenetic bees the way we move around and expend physical energy. So anyway, the way this thing's moved was it was moving a very, almost like you would move if you're starving. If you haven't eaten for a long time, how everything is kind of like in slow motion. So that's what he's describing on the phone. And he says it's really amazing. He's explained to me the situation about what happened there and what's been going on there. And I'll kind of fast forward because I hear about this and I say, okay, I'm going to go check this out myself. There's another guy in the group, a Canadian. His name was Adrian Erickson. He was a wealthy real estate developer. He hears what's going on too. Not only is there footage, but they have footage of something that's coming to the back of this property almost every night. And we're like, okay, this is one of these situations that we've been expecting would eventually happen, especially involving a young one. Because what the story is, these people, the lady, a series of events led up to the lady of the couple going out and leaving food out on the edge of the property. And a young one, which is again kind of what we predicted, eventually a young one that maybe just isn't wise enough, because that's what will happen with other animals. Young ones will be less cautious. A young one is coming almost every night and taking this food. And she has seen it. And it came by one time when there was enough light for them to film it. And so we're thinking, okay, we have to set up some cameras that can film when this happens. And Adrian wanted me specifically to go do it because he knows that I do know how to do this stuff better than almost anybody else in the world. Because I don't underestimate how smart these things are. So for example, other people in this situation, they would have wanted to put cameras right nearby where the thing comes up to eat. And I came in and I said, we are absolutely not going to do that. We're going to put a camera a great distance away and zoom in. So nothing changes right around where this thing is as much as possible. We're not going to touch it. These things are so skittish. If we put up cameras right there, they're going to be wise, they're not going to do it. But there was still a problem with illumination. And so even if we had an infrared camera, a camera that could see like something, not see heat infrared, but see an area that would be illuminated by invisible infrared light, we couldn't have an infrared spotlight shooting a few hundred feet. So we had to figure out how to get a light up above where the lady would leave the food out. And boy, was that a big argument, because then of course we had to bring a cable, a wire down there, and we had to make it so that we're not disturbing this thing at all, so as not to make whatever is coming up to make it skittish and want to leave. So, but what the backstory was about how that developed, her husband, I'm looking out of the audience and I'm thinking, I hope they're not here in the audience tonight, these folks, and they probably wouldn't like me telling these stories. The lady worked, she did like physical therapy, and the husband was in a band, and so he was home a lot, and the guy was a relentless poacher. So he would to the extent that the guy would shoot a deer just because he could. He didn't even need it. And so if the deer was near a road, he'd go down, he'd shoot one, and he'd bring it back to the property. Sometimes they'd skin and dress the deer, and sometimes he'd eat it. And literally sometimes he would just throw the deer off into the woods, again, on the edge of the property, on this downhill side, just like to get it out of the way. And so we think that's what started, because he was throwing dead deer away down there periodically. And then what he did at one point was he got a little bulldozer down the side of this hill, and he dug out a pit, like a big hole to make like a catfish holding pond. So he made this big hole, it was probably like 20 feet across and maybe 15 feet wide, filled it up with water, and then he would catch catfish in the river, and catch them and bring them back and put the catfish in there, sometimes young or catfish. And then whenever they had leftover food, he would bring it down there and throw it into the pond for the catfish to eat it. So you have a situation where rural property on the edge of a wooded gorge, where the topography was fairly flat, and there was farms at the top of like basically a plateau, and then you had kind of these creek bottoms, these creek gorges that were snaking in between. And that's different than out west, where you have flat areas and then you have hills coming up, sharp hills. In this area it's flat, and then the gorges kind of go down and the thick woods. And so the Bigfoots were coming down through these wooded gorges, and then at night coming up to the fields and the flat areas to go after deer. But here was this young one that was coming around, and the first thing they noticed, the first hint they had that something was coming around, was something was pulling the catfish out of the pond. Pulling the catfish out of the pond, eating part of it, and they didn't know what was doing it. And then they started finding footprints next to the pond, and they looked kind of like human footprints, but barefoot. And they weren't even thinking about Bigfoots or anything like that, as most people wouldn't do in Kentucky. You wouldn't find this sort of thing. I mean, nowadays you might be more inclined, but back then in 2005, it wasn't even on their radar screen. So they find these human-like footprints. They're wondering what's going on. And then one day they're out there, and it's just before sundown, and they finally see one. And they see it probably about 100 feet away, near the edge of the pond. It's only about 5 feet tall. Again, we know it was a young one because later they saw the big one too. And they saw it near the edge of the pond, kind of slowly moving around, and then kind of watching them up the hill. So they kind of flip out. They're like, what the heck is that? They thought, is this somebody in a costume? And which is a common thing when people see a man-like shaped thing covered with hair. So the husband goes inside and gets a shotgun and comes out and takes a shot at this thing above this thing, and it hits the branches and the trees, and the thing the entire time is holding perfectly still. And when he shot at above its head, hit the branches of the trees, and the debris just kind of fell down and rained down on this thing, and it didn't move a muscle. And that's what really flipped them out, because they knew if it had been a person and somebody shoots a shotgun over your head and hits some branches, you're in plain view, you're not just going to stand there, you're going to go, no, don't shoot, etc., or you'll run or do something. But this thing was hardwired to hold perfectly still. And then they realized this was some kind of very unusual animal. And then they wondered what to do, and then eventually what he did was he had his wife, because this thing was coming up regularly, he had her go down with a video camera, and that was I'm mixing up the timeline here. They got a video camera on a subsequent date, and they filmed it from a little bit of a distance, kind of walking on the edge of the tree line, down by this gorge. Again, this is maybe 5 miles east of Crittenden. For those of you who are coming in, we're talking about a case, the famous Kentucky footage case, that was basically between here and Cincinnati, about halfway between here, not far off of this town of Crittenden, which is, I guess, right along the freeway as you go up towards Cincinnati. And that's what originally, this is what was bringing me out to Kentucky and several times in 2005. So, they get this footage of it. We hear about it. 2 of our guys come out, check it out, and say, this is the real deal. They've got something going on. Adrian Erickson says, Matt, I want you to go out there, bring out blank check, whatever equipment you need, camera equipment, go out and film this thing coming up to take this food that this lady is leaving out, which she would leave out different types of food, leftovers from what they were eating. And the thing about this, and of course I'm telling everybody this in part because somebody in the future is going to end up being in another situation like this where they could repeat this, if there's a young one coming around especially. So they would put out different kinds of food near the edge of this catfish pond, the same place where the guy had been throwing down these deer that he just didn't want to have to deal with after he would shoot them, because he could. So the young one, and it would be after dark, and it became this routine that she started doing, and the lady was really, there was a lot of tension there between her and her husband, and both of them and us, because she was so afraid that if people found out what was going on there, that there'd be all sorts of people there coming there to try to kill this thing. And of course, I can understand why she would think that, because her husband is exactly the kind of guy who would do that. So she thinks, the whole world, she really worries about that sort of thing, and it made sense to me. So she was very cagey about what he would tell us some things, and one of the things that he would tell us was when she would bring down the food and leave it out there. She would leave the food out, and this was out of view of the house, the main house, but it was in view from like kind of a garage structure that was about maybe 80 feet away from the house. So you couldn't be in the house and look down the hill and see where this pond is or the thing was coming up. But from this garage, which nobody's in it, and it has this kind of back room, and that's eventually where I set up the camera. But she would leave the food out there, down there, and then he said she sings to it. And she sings to it, and then she comes back up, and then the thing, about 15 minutes later, the thing will come up out of the woods and go after the food. And of course, we were like, what does she sing to it? What is it she does? And she was very adamant that she didn't want us to record what she does, and she didn't even want us to hear what she does. Oh, so all we knew about what she would do was him like doing his imitation of it. He would do it, he goes, yeah, she gets down there and she goes, come on, little man, come on, little man, come on. So kind of like you'd be calling out to your farm animals. Like, come on in to eat, like calling out for the chickens almost. So, come on. And so she would do this kind of sing-song thing, and the reason this whole worked is because this lady was so courageous. I mean, she would walk down, when we finally set up the camera and filmed what she would do, and one of the conditions was we couldn't have sound. We couldn't record because she didn't want us to record what she was singing out to it. But when she would bring down the food, this was in a thick, deep wooded hollow down behind the house, and it was dark. So she'd walk down, and you could tell by the way she was walking that she's holding the plate and she's feeling where the trail is because she can't see it. And so she's walking in total darkness, knowing that these things are not far away. And she puts it down and she sings to it for a few minutes and then turns back and then just like, as if she's blind, because she is, it's totally dark. And she walks and she comes back up. And she would do that. So when we set up the camera, we saw that. And the night that we set it up, it was Adrian Erickson and I, etc. And we knew this was a little, we got back up into the house, which would have been about 200 feet away from where this thing would come up. And we had the camera, I said, listen, if we get the sense that this thing knows we're up here looking out the windows, then we're going to back out. But we're going to have the camera set up where it can still film it. And again, Adrian wanted me to do it. He knows I've had more experience with these things than almost anyone else. He knows I'm ultra cautious about not tipping them off about things like cameras that might be in a setup. So the camera is inside a structure 200 feet away, and not just inside the structure, but if the window is here, I have the camera up in a nook at the back of the room, looking out, so in the back of the room, so if you're in the room, you can barely see it, and then it's looking across the room, out the window, down the hill 200 feet away. So there's no way, but this thing knew when we were up there looking out the window and talking, and we're up there, she goes and does her little sing-song thing, and after about 10 minutes, we hear, boom, a really loud metal sound on the roof. And then we're like, what the hell was that? And we said, something's throwing rocks on top of this roof. And we're like, no. And sure enough, a minute later, bam, another rock lands on the roof. And I said, we have to go. It knows we are here and it doesn't want us, it's wise to us being here. So we're gonna get at it. It probably wants the food, but it doesn't want us watching it. So we back out of there and we leave. And of course, Adrian is just totally over the moon, excited. He's like, this is great. So we end up getting that first piece of footage where here it comes and you see and I would show this footage. I've told people about this footage for a long time, but Adrian Erickson owns the footage. He got there, and the other pieces of footage that I'll tell you about from this place in Kentucky, he's wanted to put it into a documentary. But he's really wanted to get more footage for a couple of reasons, I'll explain later. But he hasn't released it, and I don't have the rights to it, even though I helped get it. I have a copy on one of the laptops. I don't want to make him mad by showing him, but it will be released someday, and I can tell you about it at least. So you see black and white footage of something illuminated by infrared light, kind of in the distance. So it isn't super detailed, but you can see it come up. It comes up from behind this spur, reaches up to this paper plate, which after a while she realized what the thing liked most of all, this young one, it almost got addicted to it, was pancakes with maple syrup and lots of butter. And this was after experimenting pot roast, pie, all these different kinds of things. But when she did, there was something about maple syrup, and that rang a bell because years before in Ohio, I saw at a place where the thing in the wintertime, had gouged out the pulp of maple trees. And I was like, why would it gouge out the side of a maple tree? What's it getting at? Well, the maple tree will ooze sap. If you gouge it, you get in through the bark. And so that sap is going to have, sugar in it. It's going to have some caloric value. And it's not like maple syrup exactly. When you get maple syrup, it's processed. They take in the raw stuff and they cook it and process it. So it's not exactly like what you get out of a tree. But if the thing would have, if they do the same thing in Kentucky, this thing would have recognized the taste of maple syrup. And so it not only would eat every single little bit of these pancakes of maple syrup on this paper plate, but the syrup would be all over the paper plate, soaked in the paper plate, and it would eat the paper plate afterward. That's how much it liked it. That was the clue. Oh my God, it's not just eating the food, it's eating the plate too. It must really like maple syrup. So we got the video footage of it coming up, picking up this plate, and kind of, in one very smooth motion, it kind of folds the paper plate like a taco and turns around, and then turns around, sits down on the berm, and it's got the back to the camera, and it's eating. You can see the back of it, and the head has got a lot of fur, so it looks like, we called it the Kentucky, because there was an old newspaper article talking about Bigfoots, and they said they had big heads, which we think is because they had a lot of fur on their heads, and they called them Kentucky big heads. And again, it was because just the fur, and that may be a regional thing with these Sasquatches that have more fur on the head. So you see this thing from behind, it's eating it, and then at the end you see it from behind, the arms go up as if it's licking its fingers. It's moving stuff up, and then it gets up and walks away. So that was the first footage that we got out of there, and we were just totally psyched. Because we're thinking, we're gonna get this every night. Now, there's so much to this story. I'm just thinking what part to go to next. But I think the important things about it are the pieces of footage they got out of there. So I think, is this hooked up? Yeah, okay. I'll show you, I think I'll do a frame of like, what he did at one point. See, he had his wife go down into the woods, down by where this thing would come up to get the food, and be all dressed up in like a ghillie suit, wait in the bushes, and do her little sing-song thing to get this thing to come up so she could film it with a camcorder from down there. And she did. But one of the maddening things about the clips that they would get was, the guy Adrian was, there was a big argument between him and I about how we would work with these people, because the husband was, this game that he was playing. What's up?
I was going to try to get over.
Yeah, okay, go ahead and do it.
What do you want me to search?
Make it so that just get us on YouTube and bring it to YouTube edge. And yeah, put in Kentucky Bigfoot video. Maybe we can find it.
Where's Bubba?
Yeah.
There's Bob.
Put in that and it brings me up. So go to, there we go. Okay, so this went down here. So this was a news conference, and there's Adrian Erickson, and they're talking about.
I told you I was going to win.
Windows 11 taking to another
After
level.
the news went down.
Training employees and experiencing comfort. Seeking full of that quick general response.
Breaking news out of Texas, Bigfoot is real. According to a group of researchers, they call themselves the Sasquatch Genome Project, and they released what they say is proof. Several never-before-seen short video clips of the legendary and very shy creature.
Oh, so I just look at the screen and. Okay, so let me. I just want to see how to do it because I don't want to yell.
The group spent 5
Okay, all right. I'll tell you the rest of this. There's so many parts to this story. Adrian was paying these people. I told him, because the husband was being difficult about it, playing this game where he's the wife who owns the property, she was her property, he's trying to make her think that everybody's going to try to take advantage of her, and us, we have bad intentions just like everybody else, so she needs him to help her manage this and get the best out of this. And of course, everything he was telling her was the wrong thing. These people would be international heroes by now if they would have done what we were telling them to. But he would automatically resist everything because the game he was playing with her was that, yeah, these people, they're just trying to outsmart you this, trying to fool you this, so if they want you to do this, then you have to do this over here. And it was so maddening that after a while I told Adrian, I said, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I don't care what happens there, because this dude is always going to be attached to it, and it's going to drive me crazy. And I said, it'll drive you crazy too. And it did, but eventually, but I said, because he was immediately like, okay, we need to hire them to get more footage. And I said, no. Not in a situation like this. Not with somebody who's this dishonorable. What you have to do is tell him, we'll pay you like $100 per second of footage that you get, or something like that. $100 per second. But he's like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to. We got to do it whatever they want because this is a special situation, and we just got to pay them up front. And I'm like, no, don't give them money up front. Not this guy. But Amy's all, look, Matt, I'm a businessman. I know how to do this. Canadian accent. Oh, let me work this. Let me take this over. And so he gives them $20,000 on the spot. And I'm like, Adrian, that's the dumbest thing you could do. Matt, this is a special situation. I've been waiting for this my whole life. So the effect of that was that once he paid him up front to get some footage, then when the guy would get some footage, he would only shoot maybe 20, 30 seconds, and then he would turn the camera off.
Oh.
Because he was thinking that he gave a whole, he got the money up front. If he got this great piece of footage, then we'd be like, okay, thank you very much, that's what we needed, and we'd be gone. But he knew if he only gave us a little bit, then the guy would keep giving him money to get a little bit more footage. So Adrian ended up with these clips that are amazing, and then they just cut off. And you go, what? Why did it cut off? And it's just, it makes you so mad to see that, because you know just by watching it, it's not like the thing walked away, it disappeared. The guy just turned the camera off because he was playing a game with the sponsor who kept giving him money to get more footage. And so eventually what Adrian did was he was just kept money of this anniversary. He eventually buys the property from them. So he ends up throwing, after a while, over the course of time, $500,000 he spends on this. And I kept telling him the whole time, I said, listen, I know this is something I said, listen man, I lived in Ohio. I know how to deal with these guys. I was a squatcher there. When you have somebody playing games like that, where they're trying to jerk you around, etc., and you're just trying to do something straight, I said, you should have said $100 per second. And if you would have said that, you'd have an hour's worth of footage by now. And he knew a year and a half later, he said, yeah, Matt, I should have done what you said. You're right about that. Yeah, that's not, and oh my God, it was so maddening. And I just had to kind of divorce myself from it, because I said, this is going to drive me crazy. Not only is the guy at the location going to drive me crazy, but then dealing with having Adrian, not listen to my advice about how to do with it so Adrian blew a whole bunch of money on it. He could have gotten a lot more footage, but I'll show you one little piece and this is a short piece, maybe a few seconds, of what was in total only about 30 seconds long, because the guy told his wife, like, don't give him too much, because we'll never get any more. He'll have what he needs, and then won't give us any more money. But this is a real Sasquatch. Where's the cursor?
Oh, he just blew it up.
Okay, well, I see the screen. Where? I don't understand.
The cursor's on his
Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to run it and then stop.
Yes, and $500,000.
That was one of the pieces. But this is one piece of the footage. Now, what you heard, if people who were following this for a long time, they heard that, oh yeah, this thing looks exactly like a Chewbacca mask. And that was just bogus, because they're talking about a graphic where the guy showed a graphic of a Chewbacca mask where the Chewbacca mask image was altered to look more like this. But this was the real thing that I and several other, even John Bindernagel, the Canadian, and I think Jeff Meldrum also came out and actually saw this thing there live. But this was a real one. This was a young one, and you can kind of see the teeth, you can see the nose, and I'll run it for a second. And it didn't look like what people expected. So there was a lot of resistance at first. They're like, oh, that doesn't look like a Bigfoot. It's like, well, how do you know what a Bigfoot looks like? You ever seen one? Why would you think this is not what they look like? Because you had it's not like, it doesn't match the artist rendition that you saw. It doesn't match the, Jack Link's thing. It doesn't match, Harry and the Hendersons. Those are all artist depictions. This is actually what they look like in the face. And this was a young one, and we think it was a young female.
I see it now. Oh, the teeth, I see the teeth.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay.
And in the, so here. In the full footage, this was shot in July of 2005.
Coming to this conclusion, one clip is of...
And you can't really tell, but what happens is, it walks up to where she was normally feeding it. She's hiding in the bushes, and it was really eerie in the footage because the thing, it walks up and it's panting, like as if it's overheated, because it's July in Kentucky. It walks up, it's overheated, and it's panting real hard, and then it's it comes up first, it looks up the hill, she's standing over here, and it turns real slowly and looks right in her direction. And of course, that kind of flipped her out. Yeah, the thing was turning and looking right at her. So that's the face of it looking right straight toward her. And it's hard in here. I could play it a few times. I mean, the original footage, you could see it much more clearly. And this was a newscast where they're showing a brief portion of a brief clip. I'll put it back here again. But this is the only one that he ever kind of allowed to be public, and he was showing these pieces of footage because he wanted to get more clips like this to have as part of his documentary. Because he ended up having, I think from this Kentucky property, he got about 10 different clips. Some were night vision, some were daylight, some were which are not thermal infrared, but what's called near visible infrared, like with an infrared illuminator, different kinds of cameras and short clips. But none of them was, we knew that this was a potential at this property on this occasion to get a long, 10 minutes of continuous footage of one of these things. Clear, continuous footage. If we would have been able to do what was necessary. We had a young one coming up, it would eat, sometimes it would come up before sundown, and if the people would have cooperated with us, we'd have that, and they would be famous and rich. I mean, it would have been a big deal. But he was too busy kind of milking this Canadian businessman and giving brief little kind of clips. So the dude would give him, because of course when Adrian would see a piece of footage like this, Adrian gave him $20,000, the guy came back and gave him this footage. And of course Adrian was like, why didn't you just let the camera roll? And it's like, well, we didn't, she got a little nervous. And it was like, no, we knew what was going on. We knew the game he was playing. So what does Adrian do? He could have at that point said, okay, from this point forward, I'm going to pay you $100 per second of footage. And of course, we would have all kinds of footage. But what did he do? He gave him another $20,000. And I was running expeditions at the time, and people they were like, man, you can't come on the expeditions when this stuff is happening, because I'd be telling people about it, and I was getting too upset. Here was this golden, once in a generation situation where we could have just blown away the world with what we could get out of this property in Kentucky, if it would have just worked right. But let me show you some of the other pieces of it. Again, it's just appropriate to talk about Lexington, because this isn't very far.
To this conclusion, one clip is of Sasquatch sleeping, shot during the day in Kentucky back in 2005.
We've all had experience.
Okay, this is Dennis Full, who Adrian asked me who should help him to live there to manage the situation, and I recommended this guy, Dennis Full from Colorado.
That have changed our lives. I mean, literally shook the foundations of what we believe in.
Besides the video, they say they also have DNA proof of Bigfoot's existence. One of the researchers stressed that their work has been a, quote, serious study.
Okay, so you got the one clip, and I wish you could see the full, clear version of this one, and again, only 30 seconds, and it'll make you mad though, because the camera just you're seeing this thing, best footage, clearest footage that's ever been obtained, and it just stops. And you're like, what's going on? And so there was other clips like that. What eventually happened is Adrian bought the property. He paid for it, paid way more than market value, and then he asked me who we should. I said we should get a scientist to move in there and continue doing this. Well, I picked up the scientist for him, a woman who had been coming on expeditions, Dr. Leela Hashik out of Princeton. And she moved in there. But what happened was, and it just shows you just the depths that this dude, just something about honorability. They took the money, they sold the house. he should have had in the contract, and again, if I had been involved in it, I would have said, you know what? We're gonna make this deal is they gotta sell the house and then move to a different county. Get the hell out of that area. Because what do you think? They sold that house and he bought a house a few hundred yards away. And then they lured that one that was coming to this property, then they had it coming to the new one. And it never went back to the old one because now she's feeding it at the new one that they got. And so then he had to continue paying them to now try to get footage at the new property. And the scientist who moved into the old one had to shuttle over there, and so we were still at the guy's mercy. And I'm like, Adrian, this guy is just robbing you. Why are you just letting this happen? You should have, I would have, if you would have let me play hardball with this dirtbag, you'd have everything you need. And you can see how mad I am just talking about it now, years after the fact. I was a lot more upset about it back then. So anyway, so it started going to the new property, and because he kept paying them, they at least continued to cooperate with Leela from Princeton. And at one point, Leela and the woman were driving down the road, and it was in winter, and there was snow on the side of the road, and that was Leela's best encounter because they look off to the side of the road, not far from the house, in the snow, and there's the young one, kind of off to the side of the road. They spot it. So they stop the car, and Leela's able to get out, of course, amazed. This is their Princeton scientist who's like, she's heard the thing, she knows they're around, but she's finally seeing one close. And the woman gets out, her name was Sissy, that was her nickname. She gets out and she starts doing her little singing thing, hello little man, hello little man. And she starts kind of walking toward it, and then the thing at one point kind of freaks out and squats down and starts grabbing snow and throwing it at them. And then they're like, oh my God, and they get back in the car and they drive away. So that was the best visual that Leela, Dr. Hashek, got of the Squatch. And again, John Bindernagel came out from Canada, and he actually got to see at least the young one, and he knew that it was for real. And then eventually, I think they just stopped coming around. And so I think the total time that this was going on, if I'm not mistaken, was about maybe a year that this was all happening before the things just moved, just as they tend to do. It's one of the reasons they haven't been discovered or caught, because they don't stick around in any one place long enough for humans to kind of plan and organize to either film them or catch them, whatever. They just, like kind of cougars, they find somewhere else to go, and they're gone. So these things kind of eventually left. But there was a lot of lessons learned, a lot of things they learned during the course of this, which I find very reliable. It doesn't mean that Squatches all over the United States and North America will do these same things, but it happened there. And one of the things was there was snow on the ground, because in this area there's no caves. What they would do is, and they would see the markings of this and the tracks, everything, when they wanted to sleep, they would brush the snow all out of the way, so when they lay down on the ground, they were laying on just dirt without snow, which I thought was very interesting. And of course it made sense. If you don't have any caves, you gotta lie down somewhere, and everything's covered with snow. You don't wanna lay down actually on the snow. So they would brush an area of the ground clean of snow and then lay down on that. And they had photographs of that. I think it was Leela who took the photos of that. And I was like, that's a good thing to know, because then that's one of the things you want to look for. If you're in an area that doesn't have caves and there's snow around and you find tracks, you can figure out where they're laying down, because they're going to put something on top of the snow. If there's leaf litter or something they can put on top, or they're going to move the snow out of the way. The other thing that Dennis said, which was just amazing to hear, he said it really seemed like these things had a sleep pattern where they would sleep for 4 hours roughly, and then be awake for 4 hours roughly, and then sleep for 4 hours, and then be awake for 4 hours, and they would just kind of do that all through the day. And who knows, maybe they would only do it at this time of the year. It's possible that maybe only these did that, but I would tend to think the behaviors that ones like this would do would be common amongst many others. So, anyway, I'm trying to think what else about this would be helpful to you. Yeah, they didn't hear, eventually they saw the big one too. One of the amazing things too is they had this great sound recording of when at the new house, when she got this one to come up to the newer place, she was able to, the woman was able to get close to this thing like nobody else could. And I think it was because she was the one bringing it food, and she was the one kind of singing to it, but she still couldn't get any closer, like for me to this front row, like 20 feet. And that was, and the thing would let her know because it would kind of start growling if she got any closer than that. But she was able to get close to these things, and she was, again, extremely protective of these things, as if she didn't have any kids, and it was as if like this was her child. But this sound recording that he got, was of her approaching this one and doing her little sing-song thing to it. Again, this is during the day. Hello, little man, like trying to talk. And it was the sound of the thing trying to communicate back. And it was just these low kind of growls. These, and I remember hearing this going, well, first of all, this is definitely for real. It's not the guy doing, because you can hear his voice right next to the recorder, and this thing is a little bit in the distance. But this is some definite interaction going on between this lady and this young Sasquatch. And this is so far beyond anything that we had ever knew or experienced with this. It was just like, it was incredible. And again, it was frustrating because it's like, if we could have developed this the right way and documented it the right way, then it would have been phenomenal. But the dude was kind of milking the benefactor. And eventually all that was ending up with was these truncated, these shortened clips. And what Adrian wanted to do was he wanted to make a big popular documentary, which he could have done if he would have gotten just one more piece of footage that lasted a few minutes. And you would think the Patterson footage wasn't that long, so this clip, the full clip here, is actually probably twice as long as the Patterson footage. You think, why don't you go back? It's twice as long as the Patterson footage. Well, the Patterson footage, the thing walks away and it disappears and it's gone. And that's when the film, I think he still continues looking up there, and it's gone, and you're like, okay, well, it's over. You can't see it anymore. So it doesn't make you angry when it stops. But watching this and you're seeing the thing turn and look right into the camera, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's over. And you're like, ah! And so Adrian didn't want to have people come and watch this documentary and walk out being pissed off from all these clips that start off. So he just wants a piece of footage that just one long one, and then he'll release everything he has. So he did this news conference, and he was trying to reach out to people across the country, thinking there's either more pieces of footage already out there, or there's a lot of people out there who could get footage, and he wants them to bring their footage to him so he can make his great documentary, which in large part would be about Adrian, and when you would meet him, Adrian's a good guy, but one of the things, this is a big game hunter, a bow hunter. When you'd first meet him, he'd bring in his photo album, and he'd show you all these photos of all these big dangerous animals around the world that he had shot with a bow. Water buffalo, lions in Africa, all these, just like from all over the place. And he was super proud of this. And so, of course, he would have, and he would, he's Canadian, British Columbia. This is a manly man. He kills all these dangerous animals with a bow and arrow. And so this documentary, what he was trying to emphasize is this was kind of, the footage of a Bigfoot would be the ultimate trophy. He wouldn't have a dead one that he shot with an arrow, but it takes the same kind of effort and cunning and etc. skills to get that kind of a trophy. Anyway, so he never got all of that great footage, and so he never released the documentary that had all the clips from Kentucky. But we learned a lot from it, and people often ask, like, where exactly is this property? Where does it? Things still come around? And we're like, but probably with everything that happened there, they might not ever come around again, and into that area. They might go somewhere else. But that scenario may arise in the future, and to do this same formula, you'd have to do something that I wouldn't do, nor would I recommend anybody else do, which is like every periodically throw a dead deer out in back of your, near a catfish pond. I mean, just all these things that kind of came together that would have attracted their attention and make this young one come back like every single night eventually. But the leaving food out and leaving leftovers is something that people could do if they think these things are coming around. And I tell people, I think one of the factors here, because other people have tried leaving out food, is she was leaving out food in a very dark area on the edge of the woods that was out of view of the house. And that's so important because these things are so wise that I think if she'd been left food out where you could see a window, and then it would know that people could be looking through the window back down to where the food is, or if there was a white light shining on it, something to make it easy to see what's coming up to take the food, then it wouldn't come up to take the food. So it had to be in a place where nobody would see it, wouldn't be able to see it coming up. And not just coming up to the food, but sitting there, sitting down and eating these pancakes of syrup and then eating the paper plate, afterwards. And then walking away and then just knowing, just like a young person or a child would, it's got a sweet tooth. And this is the thing, it's not gonna miss it. When it hears her out there singing, it was gonna come and do that. So this went on for months. It went, well, I can't tell you exactly how long it went on for. It at least went on for several weeks, where she was having it regularly come every night and do that. But again, one of the lessons is maple syrup seems to have a magic spell over them. And I think it was the fact that because I would ask her, I said, what exactly were you leaving out there that the thing was coming after? So it was pancakes with a lot of maple syrup and a lot of melted butter. So these are all sweet and high-caloric, fatty things that it wouldn't find in its natural environment. Yet it would do what it would do, it would serve so many things to its benefit. It would allow it to put on some layer of fat, which with the way they live, they're not able to do that, and that's totally crucial for them. If they're trying to get ready for the winter, something that's going to have some fat in it is just gold. So here it is, the sugary maple syrup and fatty, and then the calories from the pancakes themselves. This was just gold for them. In a way that meat wouldn't be, because they probably get meat from deer. So it's the carbs, the concentrated carbs that would have been the magic thing. That the closest thing that they're going to get in the natural environment to a whole bunch of carbs would be like roots of cattails. There's not going to be a lot out there that are going to have that much of a concentration of carbs, that are going to be like instant digestible carbs. Well, I'm trying to think, what are the other useful lessons from that? One of the things was, again, when we've had situations where we thought we could cultivate it, where there was maybe a young one, people found young tracks out, and this is like at a rural house, and maybe we can get the same thing going again. Well, the lady, which we figured this probably has something to do with the fact that it was a lady, not a man, bringing the food out. And you could tell the difference probably because of the voice tone. When we had a situation that had come up, The last thing in the world the lady wanted to do was walk out in the dark and bring a plate of food out for a monster in the woods. She just wasn't going to do it. And this one in Kentucky, she was as brave as hell. But we couldn't find a situation, these rare situations occurred. It's getting the woman to go out and do the same kind of thing. Stand out there, put down a plate of food, stand out there in the darkness and sing out to something that she can't see. I think part of it is she would sing to it, she would continue singing out to it until it would answer back. It would make some kind of a sound where it would let her know that it's coming. And then that's when she would turn and she would go back up into the house. By the way, am I running out of time here? Somebody tell me.
No.
No? Are you sure?
2:05.
What's that?
2:05.
So how much time do I have left? 10 minutes, okay. Anyway.
Do you have any other experiences in Kentucky that you could tell us about?
Yes.
Okay.
Nothing quite like that, though. I mean, it's going to be a step down from there.
Okay. Well, what do you think about the Bigfoot situation in Kentucky? Do you think there's a lot? Do you think it's a fertile place?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just as good as Ohio. Because it's ultimately a food factor. A food factor combined with, how much food they can get, how much area is there for them to hide and stay out of view. Those two things together. And so if you were to go straight north from here into Ohio, you get into areas where it's all flat kind of farm fields, and you don't have those hollows in between where they would go down into during the day, and so would deer. So in parts of Kentucky, I mean, the more that you have like these kind of wooded hollows that have like maybe a creek running through, but they're on private land and nobody goes down into them, those are the sorts of places they're gonna like, and there's a lot of that around here. So, yeah, I don't think, the only thing I thought that was really special about Kentucky was, this may be a holdover from the days of Daniel Boone. We were in a lot of places where people, if they had leftover food, if they had food that would go bad, they didn't like the idea of throwing out food away. They would prefer to leave food out and let the animals get it. Like, give it to something. Give it to their own animals, give it to wild animals, but not just throw it in the garbage. And we kept hearing that so much in Kentucky, we're thinking, why would that be so unique? Why would that be a thing here? And what we know is there was a time when in Kentucky, and that's why Daniel Boone was a hero, when there were a lot of people starved here. The first settlers came over before Daniel Boone pioneered the path for people to bring cattle in here. There was the original Kentuckians set up, forget which area, but yeah, there was a portion of Kentucky where a lot of people starved because they didn't have cows, and they couldn't get cows here, and this would have been in the 1700s. When they brought in cows, that made it so that people they weren't gonna starve. So it may be that there was an attitude about food that it was just a really bad thing to throw food away.
And by the way, do you believe the story about Daniel Boone shooting a Bigfoot? Of course,
the Daniel Boone shooting a Bigfoot? I don't know. Okay. But I know that he made it so it was, what is it called? The Cumberland Gap? What is the thing that Daniel Boone finally pioneered that allowed people to bring in cattle?
Wilderness Road.
There you go. Okay. And is it not true that he made it so that people could bring in cattle?
He made an Indian path wider.
Okay. And before that, people didn't have cows here, and they starved. Is that true? Like in the winter, there was like a famine where it's because they didn't have domesticated animals. Okay, good. Thank you. But in terms of Daniel Boone shooting one, I've heard that, and I've heard that that's the origin of, they called them the Yahoos. I know there's a story out there. I don't know if there's any truth to it. I have no way of evaluating whether it's true or not. I know I can evaluate what happened here in Kentucky as being true because I was there. When that happened, the thing it was throwing rocks when I was up top.
Well, you said this guy had all these films and he bought it from these people. When is he going to produce?
That's what I was saying before. He wants to make a documentary, but he wants to get some other really good piece of footage as opposed to just a series of short clips that would make you angry or at least suspicious of all this footage that is just mysteriously, it's all these very, very short
So
things.
he wants to get it from this same property.
No, he knows he can't get it from the same property. That's why he went on TV. He was hoping that other people would bring him their films and he could put in his documentary. And, you know, one of the things I was saying when this was going back on in 2005, they're saying, well, is he going to do this, or what's going to happen here, or what's going to happen there, and why are you just letting Adrian do this? And I was telling people back then, well, Adrian's not getting this footage just to sit on it and not show it to anybody. Of course, that's exactly what happened. He's got all this footage, and I mean, if you know him, or if you know Dennis Foll, the guy who organized the Colorado BFRO expeditions, he's got all the footage on his laptop because he was the guy who went there. So if you go on the Colorado expedition, you can see it all. Because he'll show it to anybody who has it. I have the footage that I helped get. I have the copy of that, what we call the pancake footage, where it's coming down and getting it. But again, it would be, when you see that, it's kind of like, you know it's real and it's amazing, but boy, does it leave you dissatisfied because you want to see more. And so that's what Adrian knew. He didn't want to leave that feeling with people who came and saw the documentary, a feeling of total frustration of only seeing brief
I'm
clips.
frustrated just listening about this situation.
Yeah.
I want to see it. I mean, just show 30 seconds.
Well, I was
I
showing you.
I know you don't have it, but do you have any contact with this guy?
With Adrian?
Yeah.
I do, but if I want to see the footage, I've seen it all, like,
Okay,
I don't have it,
so
but
you're not buddies with him, you can't encourage him to let loose of this footage then?
I can't encourage him to say, let me show this at a conference.
Okay.
He'll show it to me. Dennis has it. Dennis shows it to people on his laptop.
Okay.
I have like the pancake footage, but it's like this clip where the thing comes and just like turns, and again, it's originally looking up the hill, imagining the camera, and just this slow turn and looks right in her direction and just holds it there, and then it stops. And his excuse was, even though she was filming it, he had instructed her to not film too much. So she turned, and she was kind of going along with it because he was doing that to hustle Adrian, and she was doing it to, because she was very protective of it. So she,
Is this couple still alive?
I don't know.
This is whether Bigfoot got him or something.
Yeah.
Should we storm that place?
What's that? Yeah, we got a couple of minutes, so we might as well finish talking about that. Anybody have questions about that? About the Kentucky footage? Yes. I'm not even close to being able to hear you. You're going to have to yell. You're covering your mouth.
What the hell? Next.
I don't know. You can ask me afterwards, but I'm having trouble hearing you. Anybody else with a question? Go ahead. I think Adrian sold it. I'm not sure what happened with the property. But you know what? Let's do one last little thing before we go. Let's look up where that property was. How do we do this?
Deep in the heart of the Cherokee Nation, locals have spotted a mysterious creature. We tagged along as they tracked and collected evidence of the beast many know as Bigfoot.
Okay. Bring up Google Maps and find cricket. Yeah. about yay big, about 5 feet tall. And then there was a much bigger one that they would see occasionally. And the bigger one was interesting because at least a couple said the bigger one was coming up and apparently very angry and making a lot of threatening sounds at the young one when the young one would come too close to their property, as if it was trying to keep the young one away from them. Like it didn't want the young one to come around the humans, but the humans were providing the pancakes and syrup. You got Crittenden? All right. So it would have been in this direction. I can barely see this screen. So I knew we would get off the freeway. Where is it? 491. I don't know if I'm going to be able to take it out, but it's generally near. It was a few miles to the east of Crittenden. And I'd have to study about it, but it's always relevant because what would be relevant about it is to see the terrain type, to see that you had kind of flat plateau and these hollows that kind of that snaked in between. And then the hollows were creeks that eventually connected to bigger rivers and river bottoms. And that would have been the pathway that these things would have used to kind of move around here and there. And they could snake around through these creek beds and then probably get up onto the plateau in the fields at night, because that's what the deer would do. The deer would be down in the shaded hollows during the day, and they'd come up and feed in the graze in the fields at night. So, yeah, the other thing in in Kentucky, I can tell you about the other more interesting thing was, and we did an episode we did for Finding Bigfoot, where there was the eye shine of the creature, and you hear the guy saying, eyeballs, I see eyeballs. And I was arguing with Renee, and she goes, oh, it's an owl in a tree. And I said, there's no branch for the owl to sit on, etc. So that was in Kentucky. It was, oh man, I should have been, it was, well, watch the episode if you ever see it again, the Kentucky episode, because we say where it was. It was in a lake area. What is it called? Cape Run Lake. Cape Run Lake, okay. So it was, but this was an area that wasn't too far away from a campground. And people kept seeing these things there. And so she finally went up with these young guys at night, and she had a Sony night shot camera. And she filmed it was either glowing or reflecting eyes, and they were big and kind of far apart. And they were able to, they had a visual. One came up on one side and the other one came up on another of them. But that isn't the sustained kind of thing that happened off of Crittenden back in 2005. And I don't know, if you ever run into a situation like that again, at least you can tell pancakes and maple syrup is the way to go. All right, I'll take one last one, and then I think I should wrap it up. Any other Bigfoot questions? Yes?
I just want you to do the Ohio howl.
Oh. You want me to play it, or you want me to?
I want you to.
I can't do it. Listen, the whole point of the Ohio howl is it's something that people can't do. It's a big, it's like the tonality of a cow, but the duration of an air raid siren. So that's how you know it's not a cow. Oh. I mean, it's kind of. Let's just put it this way. When the first time I heard it was in Coshocton County, Ohio, it was miles and miles away from where I got a recording of one. But we've since heard that. I mean, I've heard it down at Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida. The same baritone siren, whoa, and in many different parts of the country. But I'm very proud that I was the first person to record it. And that was, it wasn't a chance thing. It was a very systematic effort of putting classified ads in before the internet, it was like in '93, putting classified ads in the newspapers in Eastern Ohio saying, "Have you seen a Bigfoot?" That led to an article in a newspaper in East Liverpool, Ohio. And because of that article, a guy got in touch with me and said they were coming around the property. I went out there. We figured out a way. There was no it was nothing that was inexpensive, a way to record for hours and hours at a time. That was before MP3 recorders. So I rigged up a way to use a VCR as a tape recorder, which is not easy to do. You have to have a video signal coming in because it won't just record sound itself. So we'd have just like a security camera, and the main thing was to record sound. We could put it on SLP play, so one cassette tape VHS could record for 6 hours. They'd swap it out at midnight, and we didn't have them do that for months. And we got 64 different recordings over the course of that fall season, and the Ohio howl was the best among them. But we got that same kind of howl on a few other occasions at different distances, and we got the woman being murdered type scream that they do, which really sounds like a woman being murdered. It's a horrible scream. And we got some knocks and some whistles and stuff like that. But yeah, we've since heard that howl in different places, and it was recorded in the Cahoga Valley area. There's something on the website that there's that recording as well. But I've heard it many places, and that's really the telltale, sound where you can distinguish it from any other animals. Nothing even comes close in North America to making that sound. Well, anyway, I could do this all night, but they won't let me. I feel very happy to be able to tell this just jumbled version of the Kentucky footage story to an audience in Kentucky, and not too far away from where it happened, and to not be as angry about it as I used to be. Anyway, have a good one. Thank you for coming. And I won't walk off with a wireless mic as I did so many times when we were filming the TV show. So who's next? Who's next? Does anybody know?
Adam.